We have an identified small number of folks who we think fought alongside terrorist groups and have returned, yes.
Why weren't they prevented from coming back to the U.S.?
Well, I think for the most part, we didn't know about them before travel.
Michael Steinbach, the assistant FBI director for counterterrorism, talking on CNN, trying to explain why many of those who have been fighting with ISIS have actually returned to our country and, quote, weren't on the FBI's radar.
Yeah, Steinbach says that they are tracking those they know about, but is concerned about Americans who train with ISIS and come home.
That is concerning. And to get more insights on this, let's call on Ron Hosko, the former FBI assistant director and now the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, we just heard the FBI assistant director of terrorism say they know about American fighters who have returned. Are we tracking them? What are you hearing from agents in the field?
Well, JD, as Mike also said, we know what we know, and in part, what concerns him more greatly is what we don't know. This is not a new phenomenon. The FBI has looked very closely at international travel since 9/11. We looked back in the really immediate post 9/11 days very closely at those who were traveling to those nether regions of both Afghanistan and Pakistan, North Waziristan, those dark areas where we knew there were training camps. And so the FBI tracked very closely those who we were aware of. That continues today with events in Syria and Iraq, where we've seen this huge void and the lure of those who would portray it as Disneyland for fighting to go and train and engage in this ideology, and the fear that they come back to this country motivated to do great harm in the United States.
As a former FBI assistant director, I want to bring your attention, Ron, if we can, to an interview FBI Director James Comey did with 60 Minutes late last year. He had this to say about Americans coming home after training with ISIS. Take a listen, and we want to get your reaction.
Ultimately, an American citizen, unless their passport's revoked, is entitled to come back. So someone who's fought with ISIL with an American passport wants to come back, we will track them very carefully.
So, James, your reaction. Do they have a right to come back home?
Well, today they do. You know, the FBI doesn't run the visa program. I think that Congress and the State Department need to look closely. Of course, we have a free country, and that.
Yeah, but when we had Ebola, we'd isolate them.
I agree. So the challenge here, part of the challenge is when somebody travels abroad, what if they say they're going to Europe? How closely can we monitor that travel, the FBI or state or someone else, monitor what the true purpose of their travel is, where did they go, how do we validate where they went and what they did? Some of these folks can go to Europe and be radicalized in communities in Europe as well. So it's the challenge of free travel. It's a great free country. How do we know what they did? How do we know what their intent is when they go, and then when they come back, and does it change? One of the challenges of this too for the FBI is, let's say they went to Syria and some are going to visit, family and friends, went for an innocent purpose to help out, humanitarian. How do we discern that, the FBI? How do we monitor that? What do we do with our surveillance resources, which are finite? And I will tell you, having been there, the FBI, this is a difficult task for the FBI. And we continually surged resources to different areas of the country to make sure we had the right monitoring and surveillance in place so that we were comfortable that a threat was a threat or was not a threat.
And Ron, you mentioned resources being finite. Sadly, so is time. We've got to step away for just a minute, but when we come back, more of the challenge of how to allocate resources to follow these folks, or else there's going to have to be a congressional fix and a presidential signature to keep them out of the country. You come back, more here on America's Forum.
We've seen across the globe kids as young as 13 recruited by ISIL. In the United States, we've seen, where we've identified kids as young as 15.
To hear Michael Steinbach, the assistant director of the FBI's counterterrorism division, tell CNN that they're finding ISIS recruiting kids here as young as 15, that is disturbing to say the least.
Yes, this as a report from the England's Daily Mail showing an ISIS manifesto for young women under their control, are you ready for this, can be married off at the age of 9, JD.
Against all this information, let's call on our friend Ron Hosko, a former assistant director for the FBI, Skyping in from Northern Virginia. So we were talking earlier about the challenge of ISIS fighters coming back into the country. What about resources to track recruitment of, in essence, junior high students to one day join with ISIS?
So, JD, we live in the greatest, freest country in the world. And you know that, young kids at any age can get online and look at YouTube and other modalities to see almost anything you want. We also, at the same time, if you want to see graphic execution videos, you can find them on our internet. And the FBI is not standing in the way of that. There are First Amendment rights that are freely exercised around this country. Those are radicalization modalities and mediums. We also have at the other end of that spectrum, the FBI is concerned, and I think you've heard the director and Mike talk about this, the concern about going dark, what the FBI refers to as going dark. And it is the technology that is getting ahead of the FBI and the other intelligence agencies. We can find them everywhere in our hand, whether it's an iPhone or an Android or an app on those phones. That makes it increasingly difficult for the FBI to collect information that tells them that somebody may be a threat, that they are going to radical websites, that they are talking or chatting with radicalized people, and they are being recruited. So the FBI really has its work cut out for it.
Ron, what is the appeal for ISIS fighters to lure young children, some as young as 9 years old? Is it because they're so impressionable?
I think it's they are becoming smarter and smarter in the use of media. We saw that in graphic form with the execution of this poor Jordanian pilot. So as ISIS is getting smarter, make no mistake, the threat has metastasized. The core al-Qaeda threat that we looked at in the immediate wake of 9/11 has spread like a cancer. It has metastasized. So now you have AQ in the AP, you have AQ in the Islamic Maghreb, you have what's going on in Iraq and Syria right now. Very different than what the USIC, the intelligence community, and DOD went after 9/11.
Mindful of that, Ron, we return to the situation here in the United States. You began to answer my earlier inquiry by saying, look, we live in the freest place on earth. So we get back to a balance. In this 1 minute, how do we balance our civil liberties and our privacy with security? And do you advocate some sort of change in our internet capabilities?
Well, I do advocate for that change. I think that these technologies that are getting ahead of our intelligence and our law enforcement agencies are going to hurt us. And I probably have said it to you before. What the United States government needs to act affirmatively is a crisis. Right now, we have a Congress and a president that can't agree on what day of the week it is. So for them to agree on where to strike that balance between privacy and security, we need to have that conversation. We desperately need it today. You see, just look at France, and now France is adding thousands to their counterterror capability. It took a crisis for them to have that conversation. And I fear that's what it'll take domestically for us to find the right balance.
And that remains the challenge. Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director, now President of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Sir, as always, we thank you for your insights. Really, that debate goes all the way back to our founders, liberty and security. You can see what Ben Franklin had to write about that. Coming back with a very different tone on our program. Stay with us.